Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Obviously it's been an extraordinary and distressing week, and I thank you very much for your support and for questioning the information that you've been presented with.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in Sociology and Psychology, my certifications in Criminal Interrogation and Body Language Analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. This week we are continuing our journey on the topic of Russell Brand. So for those of you who don't know, Russell Brand is a comedian, actor, turned social media influencer and wellness guru, and just last week on Channel 4 on their documentary program called Dispatches, there was a documentary that was released with some very serious allegations against Russell Brand. Now, a day before that documentary aired, Russell Brand on his social media platforms released a video where he completely denied all the accusations. And we looked at that video last week. But since the documentary aired, he released another video where he talked about mostly how the government and the media is trying to silence him and take away his voice. And we're gonna look at that in this video. And there is a video of him on a talk show that has resurfaced where we see some behaviors that's causing a lot of controversy online. And we're gonna look at the behaviors in that video as well. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Obviously it's been an extraordinary and distressing week, and I thank you very much for your support and for questioning the information that you've been presented with. By now you're probably aware that the British government have asked big tech platforms to censor our online content, and that some online platforms have complied with that request.
Okay, so the first thing that jumped out instantly before he even opened his mouth is the very different aesthetic between this video and last week. So last week was more professional. He was in that studio that he's been using over the last year. It looked better, the lighting was better, there were some edits in there, so it was worked on a little bit more. Whereas this time, the lighting is a little dim, and he's in a studio that it's not the first time we see him in this studio. If you were to go back a year and a half, on his channel, he was very often in this setting, where he has the curtain behind him with the plant next to him and the window. So he used to film there, and then eventually he switched over and started filming a lot more in that other background that we saw last week with the bookshelves behind him that looks a little bit more professional, even with the lighting. So I'm not really sure what this one is. Maybe it's a part of his house where he used to film when he got started, and then, he got himself a nice studio, a nice setup, so he films there more often, but every now and then he'll go here because it's more convenient. Maybe those of you who watch his content more regularly can let us know in the comments. It's possible that he addressed it at some point, what the setting changes. But whatever the case is, in this video, he's not in that setup. The next thing I want to point out is some differences between the behaviors we're seeing in this video and the last one. So, first of all, the hands. In this video, his hands are up here the entire time and he's gesturing like this. He did this in the last video as well. In fact, this is very common for Russell Brand. Now, this is a weird place to have our hands. It's very rare to see someone talk where their hands are constantly up here. Normally we gesture a little bit lower and we might come up here to really accentuate something and then we go back down. But this is someone who has a lifetime of experience in front of a camera and he's developed certain habits. And doing this, speaking this way, does keep people's attention. So this is just a force of habit for him. That being said, it's important to note that in his other videos, his hands do relax a little and then they come back up. In this video and the last one, they were always up here. The orientation of his hands is also quite important because you'll notice most of the time in this video, he's talking like this with his hands sideways. There's occasional slight twists towards him and sometimes just a little bit towards the audience, but most of the time he's illustrating like this. Now, we did talk about this last week and I said that in English speakers, studies have shown that sideways hands is the orientation we see the most often. This isn't universal. Language and culture changes the orientation of the hands, but in English speakers, this is the most common. And in last week's video, we saw his hands turn towards the audience a couple of times, and we talked about what that meant, but it's nice to see that in this video, that's not happening. This is truly his baseline, where he has his hands up here and he talks like this with the hands sideways. You'll also notice that in this video, there are times where his eyes are wide open as he's talking, but it's not the entire time. There are times where his eyes relax a little bit. Now, research has shown that when our eyes are wide open, we take in more information from our peripherals. This is why with emotions like anger, surprise, or fear, we see those eyes open up because our body is trying to assess how to react. So it stands to reason that in the denial video, where he felt like he was under attack, he was a lot more alert. Those eyes were open. He was in reactive mode. Where in this one, he's talking about the media, he's in his comfort zone, where he talks about the corruption within the media, within government. So there are times where he's not as panicked. He doesn't feel like he's taking as much fire. It fluctuates up and down throughout the video. Next, we have the blink rate, which is the number of times we blink in a minute. Now, the estimated range is somewhere between 14 to 20 blinks per minute, but this is a really ballpark number. Some people are lower than that, some people are higher. In fact, the number varies study from study because we're all very different. However, studies have shown that there are two things that consistently raise our blink rate. One of them is stress. When we're stressed, we blink more. And the second is accessing memory. So whether we're committing something to memory or retrieving something from memory, we see that blink rate go up when we're processing. On the other hand, when we're focused on something or something has our interest, we blink less often because we're trying to take it in. We're interested, we're focused. Now, for Russell Brand, his blink rate naturally is lower than average. It's quite low. In the denial video, it was eerily low. He barely blinked at all. In this video, he's blinking a little bit more often. I wouldn't say it's a high blink rate. I wouldn't even say it's within the normal range. It's still rather low, but he is blinking a little more, which would suggest once again that in this video, he's a little more relaxed. He's not as on edge or as defensive as he was in the last video. In fact, we can also hear this in his tone and in his voice. If you go listen to the last video, the denial video, and this video, his voice is two completely different things, the pitch of his voice. Last week in the denial, he was much higher. His pitch was much higher, it was more worked up. Whereas in this one, he's speaking more calmly. Speaking of pitch and tone, even just look at the first sentence that he says, the greeting to his audience. Usually in most of his videos, he starts with the same line, and it's usually high energy, high pitch as he welcomes them. Hello there, you awakening wonders. It's there, it's welcoming, it's positive.
Hello there, you 6.5 million awakening wonders. Hello there, you 6.5 million awakening wonders.
In this one, the tone is again lower, but even dips down right at the end of the sentence. Hello there, you awakening wonders. And we even hear that exhale.
Hello there, you awakening wonders.
So we're seeing here that he's even starting off on a less energy tone. We're seeing that there's this exasperation, that exhale. I mean, just imagine if I bump into you somewhere and instead of going, hey, how are you? I go, hey, how are you? Right? I mean, even intuitively, we can sense that there's something here that's negative. The whole mood here seems negative. Next, we see something that I know a lot of the regular viewers caught, and it's when he says, I thank you very much for your support and for questioning the information that you have been presented with. And as he says, I thank you very much, we see an eyebrow flash. So the eyebrows go up like this. Now, for someone who's very expressive, Russell Brand does not eyebrow flash that often. It happens at key moments, and this is one of them. So I talk a lot about eyebrow flash, and I have a whole video on the channel that talks about the research and why we know this. But one of the reasons we eyebrow flash a lot is social connection. Like think about how you bump into someone you know and you might say, hey, how are you? And the eyebrows go up. It's a way to show good intention, connection, and importance. So in this moment, it's such a perfect moment to demonstrate that social connection. He's thanking his audience and he's connecting with them socially and almost giving that social approval and requesting it back. So it's a very social moment because right now he feels like his support system, his followers, are the biggest shield he has and the biggest weapon he has. So he's having a real social moment here with his audience, and that's what that eyebrow flash is. A real connection, an approval, a showing of good intention to his audience. Now the next sentence that he says is, the reason he's thanking them is for your support and questioning the information you have been presented. So he often does this. He often has these little sentences that have almost a double meaning depending on who the viewer is. So to his regular viewers, it's a pat on the back, it's a high five, it's a thank you. Like, thank you for, questioning the media, which is what we talk about on this channel, and you're doing such a good job. So it's validation. He's validating that they're doing a good job by questioning the media. But on the other hand, it's also a set of instructions. To anybody who's not really aware of what's going on, who's just tuning in, or someone who's just coming to check out his channel after having watched a documentary to see what's going on with this guy, it's a set of instructions. He's going like, I'm thanking my audience because that's the right thing to do, but you should consider doing that too. Questioning the information that's being presented to you. That's what we're all doing. That's what we're all doing over here. You should probably do that as well. So it's a double-edged sword. The next thing I want to talk about is really cool because it's not so much what's happening, but exactly when it's happening and how it indicates how he feels towards something quite specific. So he's talking about how the British government has asked certain social media platforms to censor his content. And as he's saying that part, his baseline doesn't shift that much. It's pretty consistent with the way he's been talking so far. But then he says that some platforms have complied with that request. And we see a bunch of stuff in that moment. First of all, his speech slows down quite significantly. Have complied with that request. Like he's really emphasizing that. He articulates it really clearly.
And that some online platforms have complied with that request.
We also see that chin go down like this as he keeps his eyes on the camera. And we're talking about someone who often articulates like this with the chin up, occasionally down, but rarely this down like this with his eyes on the camera. So typically we look at comfort as open and we look at stress or vulnerability as closed. When we're feeling stressed or vulnerable, things tend to close in. We protect vulnerable areas of the body, the wrists, the neck, the organs. So when we're talking to someone and suddenly we see that chin come down like this and protect the neck while they keep that eye contact, this is typically a vulnerable moment. And in this case, it is a vulnerable moment. Now, as that chin is going down, his eyes are also opening up. So again, he's alert, he's defensive, and immediately after he says request, we see an eye flutter, a rapid succession of blinks. Now remember what we said about blink rate earlier. When that blink rate goes up, it's a good indication of either stress or processing. But when we see that flutter like that really quickly, very often, most commonly, it has to do with processing information or emotion. Like if something irritates us, we might be blinking like this because we're trying to process the emotion, trying to figure out how to deal with it. And what's interesting is that all these things didn't happen when he was talking about the request from the government, but it happened when he talked about how some of the platforms agreed to that request. That's where all this is happening. So the irritation for him, the problem, isn't the government requesting this. He's used to that. Where he's getting irritated, the part that he's having a hard time processing, understanding, the part that's making him feel vulnerable is the fact that some platforms accepted this. And that makes a lot of sense because at this point, his social media platforms are his income. And it must have shocked him, utterly shocked him to find out that some social media platforms are accepting to limit his activity on their websites. All right, now we're going to look at the rest of his message and some psychological bits that he's using to help his delivery. We're going to look at a resurfaced video that is being talked about all over the internet, and we're going to talk about what all this means. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content. And for regular viewers who want to encourage the channel, I will leave a link in the description where you can learn more about memberships and how you can join.
The Trusted News Initiative is a collaboration between big tech and legacy media organizations to target, control, choke and shut down independent media organizations like this one. It's clear that these organizations collaborate in constructing narratives, whether that's around the war or the pandemic, and of course there are other examples. And it's very clear to me that we have to be very, very cautious indeed.
Oh man, there is something that he said in that clip that immediately jumped out at me. And I'm sure that it's something that a lot of you recognize as well, whether you were aware of it or subconsciously you noted that something's going on there. But the reason it was so obvious to me is because I've built a career on this for 20 years. And honestly, it's the thing I want to focus on the most because psychologically it's strong. Body language wise, not that much going on, more of the same. There's an eyebrow flash of emphasis in there at some point, but besides that, pretty baseline. So I want to focus on this thing. So he says, it's clear that these organizations collaborate in constructing narratives, whether that's around the war, the pandemic, and of course there are other examples. Gee, I wonder what he could be talking about. What other stuff? Clearly he's talking about his own predicament without flat out mentioning it. And this has a lot of psychological merit. So what he's doing in that moment, whether he's conscious of it or this is just years of experience of public speaking on YouTube, on TV, what he's doing there is he's leaving out a very obvious blank and letting his viewers connect the dots, fill in that blank, make an assumption, and because they're the ones who thought of it and he never said it, it creates a stronger commitment. The reason I'm insanely familiar with this principle and how powerful it is once again because I literally built a career on that one psychological principle. Because if you think about mentalism or magic, that is exactly how 100% of all mentalism and all magic tricks work. Very often, the mentalist or the magician suggests things without flat out saying it. We don't say, look, this is an ordinary deck of cards. We don't say that, amateurs do, but professionals don't say this is an ordinary deck of cards. By opening it, taking it out of the box, shuffling them up, we allow you to assume that it's a normal deck of cards. Just a couple of normal coins, whatever the prop is. And in the way that we handle our props, the way we present, the way we speak, we leave out certain things and allow your mind to make assumptions, and due to those assumptions that you made, you reach conclusions and you're committed to those conclusions. And that's the only reason magic and mentalism tricks fool you. In fact, I want to demonstrate this principle by reading your mind through the screen right now. I'm holding 6 cards. I want you to think of any one of these cards. So everyone watching this video right now is thinking of one of these cards. Lock it in your mind, don't forget it. In a moment, I'm going to make the card that you were just thinking of completely disappear. Check it out. If I just snap and wiggle, one of these cards should now be completely blank on one side. Now here's the crazy part. It's not just blank on that side, it's also blank on this side. The card has vanished. But the important question is, did I make your card disappear? Well, you tell me. It's not there anymore, is it? Now, before you go calling your local exorcist or rewind the video 100 times to figure out how that was done, don't worry, we're going to talk about it. This is just a really good demonstration of the point that I was trying to make. It's one of my favorite versions of a very old trick, and there's been so many variations of it, but it's based on the principle that we've been talking about. The reason this fools you is because you're making a series of assumptions, a lot of assumptions. One of the assumptions you're making is that I know which card you thought of. I never said the card. I never proved that I know the card. All I did was show that one card was blank, and then I turned the other ones and your card wasn't there. So your mind assumed that yours is the one that went blank. But I have no idea what card you were thinking of. The other massive assumption that you made is that because your card was gone, you assumed that only your card was gone. And although I can't really comment on that because I'm not supposed to say the secrets, I'm sure that if you go back and watch that a couple of times, you're going to notice something. But the ultimate bottom line is this. We fill in gaps, we make assumptions, and we commit to those assumptions. We make those assumptions our reality. That's why magic works. And that's why sentences like this are psychologically very powerful. Because he never said that the media is lying about him. He simply said the media lies about a lot of stuff. They've lied about the war, they've lied about the pandemic, and some other stuff. So the viewer, especially those who have been following his story, go, yeah, they lie. Oh my God, they were also lying about his thing. And now they're committed to that. Because they made that assumption, they came to that conclusion. The other thing that's interesting about this video is not what we're seeing and hearing, but what we're not seeing and hearing. Very often in interrogation, I ask myself, what is the person not saying? And in this video, he's not talking about the allegations, ever. He is talking or insinuating that the media has lied about him. He is talking about how he had a rough week, but he's never addressing the allegations. He's never flat out talking about that. And it's interesting because this is the big video after the documentary was released. Like after the release of the documentary, this was his next, big video on all his platforms. So why isn't he mentioning it? I think there are a few reasons he's not bringing it up. The first one is, I feel like he feels that his denial in the other video is all he had to say. He denied all the allegations directly. He said that he's absolutely always had consent. So that's the story he put out there. The second reason I believe he's not talking about it is because that makes him consistent with his distrust of media. If he talks about the documentary, if he gives it any importance, it kind of clashes with his belief that the media is always lying and cannot be trusted, because he gives it importance. By completely ignoring it, it's like he takes away their voice. He takes away their power. Why should I talk about it? The media lies. There's nothing to talk about. Now, it does seem that there's been mention in the news that the British police is opening an investigation. And I feel like once that starts unraveling, he might change his tune and address the allegations once again. But for now, I feel like the fact that he's just not bringing it up again is an indication that he may not be that concerned about it. All right, now let's look at the clip from The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon and Katharine Mcphee. So this is in 2013, so 10 years ago. Russell was a guest on Jimmy Fallon's late night show. And when Katharine Mcphee came out, because she was the star, was going to be interviewed after him, he had some interactions with her. And back then, it made headlines, and there was all kinds of ways it was being spun. Some were spinning it as, this comedy moment. Some were spinning it as inappropriate. But recently, in light of what's going on, it has resurfaced. And again, there's a split conversation. Some people are looking at it like he was being playful. Others are looking at it like that was really inappropriate. So let's start by just taking a quick look and looking at some of the behaviors that we could see, starting with the moment she came in. So I'm not going to play the audio right now because there's some music and it might be a copyright issue, but you could see her coming in, and then this happens.
Move out of your chair and...
Katharine is welcome to
No,
sing
she's not. It's not. No, don't do it. Trust me, don't do this. Don't even say for the queen. You can't. Don't say for the queen.
For the queen!
No, don't say that, please. Russell.
You're beautiful.
Russell, please.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so I'm sure there are a lot of split reactions from the viewers seeing that moment. But let's look at the finer details of it and then talk about the general implications. If we look at it from the beginning, first of all, when she walks in and he greets her and he holds her hands, from the way it plays out, she ends up in a very awkward position because she's sitting on the red couch. He's holding both her hands, but her right arm is behind her like this. And he's holding on to her and he's still talking to her. And that's a very uncomfortable position. So she has to shift out of that. So what does she do? She gives into this playful energy. She gets up and she goes and she sits on his lap. And at this point, she's still smiling, she's bouncing, she's happy. Everything seems perfectly fine. And it seems like it's her decision to go sit there and play into this energy. Now, at some point in that interaction, as she's gonna get up, he grabs her by the waist and we see a reaction on her face. And that moment is the screenshot that a lot of media outlets are using because it doesn't look like a comfortable moment. He's smiling. She's got a look of surprise, fear, maybe a bit of anger, confusion on her face because we see the eyebrows down, which is usually consistent with anger or confusion, and her mouth is wide open, which is very common with surprise or fear, but overall, it doesn't look like a positive moment. But if we go look at why she reacted this way, it's not entirely clear because as she's getting up, he yells for the queen and he grabs her by the hips and we see her hands shoot open like this, her fingers shoot open like this. And we call this a stop gesture. So you might be in a car and somebody slams the brakes and you just go like this, or anything that startles you that you just want to stop it. Just to have a second, our fingers shoot out like this. So that happens in that moment and she immediately fixes her skirt. So it's possible that in that moment, when he grabbed her, her quick reaction was like, no, stop, I don't know what's going on. But it's also very possible that she was scared in that moment, being aware that she's on camera, that her skirt might be lifting because immediately we see her fix that skirt. So it's highly unclear what that was a reaction to, that moment of like being startled. What we do see is that she stands up, takes a step away from him, her hands come in front of her and block down here, which is a part that we tend to protect when we're feeling a little vulnerable, and she pleasantly and playfully directs him back to the chair. So, do I see this as a woman who feels enormously uncomfortable and under attack? Not really. I think at most there may have been a small moment of discomfort there, but she directed him to the chair. She sits down, she's smiling, she's talking, she's fine. In fact, Katharine, whose married name is now Katharine Foster, wrote on Twitter just a couple of days ago, Daily Mail, I know nothing what you are trying to claim here, but this specific incident was over 10 years ago and it was harmless. Please don't try and use me for whatever purpose you are trying to serve. So it seems that her version of things were that it was rather harmless. Now, Jimmy Fallon, on the other hand, does seem in this moment like, although he's still trying to keep it light and be the host, he is, standing up and saying, no, trust me, no, like, don't do this, because I think he can see this going a route that he doesn't really want on his show. So I am getting a little bit more negative emotions actually out of Jimmy Fallon than Katharine Mcphee at this point. Now, as the conversation progresses, there are a couple of times where Russell Brand interjects, and let's take a quick look at one of those.
When she said exchange numbers, I thought things that I'd like to exchange with her. Numbers!
Numbers. The fan of numbers. He likes numbers. He's not a number.
Genetic info, data.
What is happening right now?
Genetic info.
Yeah, that's all right. It's don't worry.
This is awesome.
No, don't worry about it. It's fun. So wait, so then now you're friends with the heart.
So this was the general vibe. He would cut in with these jokes and Jimmy would try to kind of roll with them and try to improvise a little to kind of lighten the situation. Katharine Mcphee doesn't look overly uncomfortable, but she does have, for a lot of this interview, her shoulder completely turned away from Russell and her attention is on Jimmy Fallon. You'll even notice here, they went right back into their conversation. She's rarely bringing him into the conversation or turning to acknowledge him, almost never with her full body. When she does, she kind of turns halfway like this. But here's the other thing about that. We rarely turn our backs on things that we consider dangerous. We usually want to know exactly what the thing is doing to see if we're threatened. So that pretty much lines up with her tweet. She's not necessarily having the best time in the world with him, but she's not threatened by him, because if she was, she probably would have a little bit more of an eye on him just to see if he's keeping his distance.
Yes, so
I didn't know
anyway.
you're married. I'm gonna off now. Listen,
Russell, this is not. Take
I've got to
care.
get a plane.
Russell Brand, everybody. There
See
he
you
goes.
later.
Take care.
Good luck, you're married.
Finally, at the end of the interview, Russell makes a joke about how he didn't know she was married, so he's gonna leave now, in other terms. And I want you to notice what happens with Jimmy Fallon. His hands come in and crumple the paper that he's holding on to. Now, crumpling the paper in their hands is quite common for some of these interviewers, especially just before a commercial break or at the end of the interview, just casually. But that's not what this is. He comes in like this and his fists just close in and crumple that paper, and then he kind of uncrumples it a little bit. But we see this moment of almost like physical cringe for a sec when that happens, and he immediately jumps on the occasion to say, Russell Brand, ladies and gentlemen, and excuse him. And again, roll with that and try to make it into comedy, but we could see that Jimmy's a little uncomfortable with these interjections. Whereas Katharine, same thing. She's acknowledging it, she's laughing along, but she's no longer feeding into it the way she did when she first came out and sat on his lap. So she gave into it a little bit at first, and then that kind of stopped. So again, I wouldn't say she's extremely comfortable. I wouldn't say she's extremely uncomfortable. I think she's just there to talk to Jimmy, and she's acknowledging the interjections without giving into them too much. And now there are a bunch of articles and videos bringing this back up and trying to paint it as, look how uncomfortable he made her. She was so uncomfortable, he shouldn't have behaved this way. So here's the way I see this. Would I personally behave that way? No. If someone behaved around you that way and you came to me and you said you felt offended or you felt scared or you felt like it was inappropriate, I would back you up 1,000%. But she didn't say that. In fact, she said the complete opposite. And she even told the Daily Mail off for trying to spin it under a different light. When sources try to spin this as her being super uncomfortable, and she says, no, it was rather harmless, I wasn't that uncomfortable, it does a lot of damage to any allegations that might be true against him, because people just look at it and go, yeah, see, the media is just trying to spin it and make it seem like he makes women uncomfortable. But here we have Katharine Mcphee saying that she wasn't uncomfortable at all. So this narrative is made up. So it's one point for him saying that the media is trying to attack him. In fact, that's what I think of this entire situation as of right now. It's true that they're trying to silence him, they're trying to cut him off. It's true that his own government has asked social media platforms to demonetize him. I shared this with my community last week. When I uploaded my video, my initial analysis of his denial, when I first put it up, I got an ad suitability claim on it. What that means is that YouTube deemed that my video can't be monetized. And there were no swear words. I hadn't said anything inappropriate. It was just an analysis, but I got that claim. And it's not a copyright claim, by the way. It's not like, oh, you've used content that's not yours. And I'm not the only creator. A lot of creators are complaining that the moment they're talking about Russell Brand, their videos are getting demonetized. So when the government does this, when the media does this, it just proves his point that they're out to get him. And what that does as a side effect, a lot of people throw the baby out with the bathwater. So in this documentary, there were some allegations. If true, these allegations should go into the investigation, these women should come out, a case should be made. But as long as there's people who are being shut down for talking about this, as long as it's being demonetized, a lot of people are going to look at it and go, he was right all along. They're just trying to silence him. This is trial by media. Everything they're saying is a lie. So what's my final conclusion on all this? It's that there's a documentary that raises concerns, legitimate concerns that should be looked into. If a proper investigation happens, he should answer to those allegations. As I said in last week's video, I also do believe that it's possible that there have been times in his past where he did cross certain lines of comfort, but he didn't necessarily interpret it that way, or he doesn't remember it that way. I don't think anyone's debating that he's come a very long way from some of the ways that he used to behave when he was younger, which were provocative. But until that investigation happens, until there's an official warrant, arrest, trial, case, something, it is unfair, I believe, for the media to do this, not only because they shouldn't be doing this to begin with, but because it hurts their own cause. If they're trying to get these people who are making these allegations be taken seriously, then they need to back off and let the evidence speak for itself. Because without evidence, we just get more of what we saw on The Tonight Show, where a bunch of people look at it and go, that's just violent and unacceptable, and others look at it and go, no, it's just all in good fun and it's harmless. Even this video, there's gonna be people convinced that he's a monster and others convinced that he's a saint. But please keep in mind something I always say, just because we like someone doesn't mean they're innocent of anything that they've ever been accused of. And just because we dislike someone doesn't mean that they're guilty of everything that they've ever been accused of. As always, I'm not defending Russell Brand. I'm not attacking Russell Brand. I do look forward to this investigation and to the evidence that it will uncover and his response. But until then, we're gonna have to wait. Let me know in the comments what you think of all this, and I will see you on the next one.